Hello and welcome to Language of the Soul podcast. I'm your host, Dominic Domingo.
And I'm your co-host, Virginia Rene.
We'd like to invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy some inspiring conversation. Here at Language of the Soul, we know that life is story. Individually, we're the products of the stories we tell about ourselves. Culture is the amalgamation of the stories we weave about the human condition. Here's the thing. Individually and collectively, we can write our own story. Thanks for tuning in and joining in the march toward human potential. Hi, guys, and welcome to Language of the Soul podcast, where life is story. I'm Dominic Domingo, author of Language of the Soul, How Story Became the Means by Which We Transform, the book that inspired this podcast. Straight out the gate, I'm going to bring in my partner in crime, author and mental health counselor, Virginia Rene. Welcome.
Hi, I'm glad to be here again.
Glad to have you for our third season. And on that note, you're really good at kind of breaking down what we're up to these days. So in the third season, maybe give new listeners a chance to get oriented and hear what we're all about. I think we're in our fifth episode addressing the book itself.
Yep, that's correct. So if you're just tuning in for the first time to this episode, I highly encourage everybody to go back to Nick reading the intro of the book the intro to the book, Language of the Soul. And then after that, we're just Nick and I just having a discussion about the intro and what was covered in that material. Then there's Nick reading chapter 1. And then last week, we did a discussion on chapter 1 where we focused on the philosophical foundation, why story matters, why it's inseparable from being human, and why it becomes essentially vital to moments of culture and personal upheaval. And so today we're going to be going different. I'm going to be shifting our lens in chapter 1 to a much narrower lens as we continue on.
And I'm excited to see what happens.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Thoughts?
Well, I was going to say, chapter 1 doesn't just argue, like last week when we were talking about how story transforms us. It explains how that transformation happens. So that's just what I mean by we're going to go a little bit narrower in our discussion today, is because we're going to be looking at some of that mechanism to us looking at how story transforms. So it's just slowing things down, going a little bit more linear through the chapter and looking more closely at how story works.
I love it. Yeah, I'm so looking forward to being specific because, as we said, they can become kind of platitudes or catchphrases, and I do like to be specific. So I'm looking forward to it. And then for our listeners, if you're a regular listener, we fantasize that we have them. Last week was, again, the first discussion. I'm calling them roundtables. And today does feel more like a roundtable because there's 4 of us. Mm-hmm. But anyway, last week, a dear friend came on whom I adore, and she's back today. Mythologist and midlife coach, Andrea Slominski. And our second guest today is another repeat guest who also happens to be a dear friend and my sister, author, vocal coach, and creativist, Rene Urbanovich. Welcome, ladies.
Hi. Hi, good morning. Good morning.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, we're glad to have you guys.
Thanks for having us.
It's awesome to be back.
Okay. Well, if Nick's up for it, I'm ready to dive in since I get to take the wheelhouse this time because that's how this whole season's kind of working out as we dive into the chapters.
Let's do it.
All
right.
You're
you're a great moderator. I love it.
Okay. All right. So I kind of already let you as a listening audience know what the plan is. So I'm just going to dive in with our first question. We're in chapter 1, and early in chapter 1, we made it very clear the distinction between want and need. So like I said, if you can go back, re-listen to that roundtable, highly suggest it. So Nick, you talked about how transformation doesn't just occur when a character gets what they want or when they are confronted with what they actually need. So I'm wondering if you can stay with that distinction and separate want from need to what is essential in transformation of a story.
Yeah, I hope you guys have something to say about this and can dovetail off of it, but it's pretty technical, actually. In the introduction, I say, well, I don't really want to do a nuts and bolts of craft or technique book, I want to talk about why we tell stories in the first place. But it is directly related, right, to transformation on the part of the patron, which is why I go into want and need. We evolve along with the protagonist because we're invested in their goal. So the distinction I make in the book, and I hate to repeat the content of the book, but for those who don't know, some films that maybe don't have literary value or really don't have much to say, it sounds very elitist, but they might not have a want and a need, which is very much a screenwriting principle. And Andrea, I know you're going to be able to speak to this. They might just have a goal. The goal is not split into a want and a higher need. I need to save the president from terrorists, and I want to. It's the same, right? But when there's maybe thematic content to be imparted, or what I'm calling something to say, there is a want and a need in screenwriting. So some of us have seen a film where, like, exactly what the protagonist should or could or might want to do, and you're like, just do it. But they have some kind of fatal flaw or some kind of blinders on, or some kind of hubris that prevents them from seeing the bigger picture. And that's the higher need. So I use Wizard of Oz as an example in the book because at one point, pretty much everyone had read or seen it. And that's no longer the case, sadly. But I don't know. We can go into some examples of a want and a higher need if you want. But do you guys feel that on a psychological perspective, this is how we operate in life? Maybe do you see the parallel? Or is it just that we transform along with the protagonist by partaking in storytelling?
That's a really good question. It always brings me back to the individual's consciousness about their own story, right?
If they're lucid or
yeah, well, I mean, we can think about what we're going through on our daily lives and what we're trying to accomplish. But then when we try to look at the bigger picture of our lives, right? When you're talking about looking at the bigger picture in terms of the narrative, that opens up a whole different interpretation of story for personal narrative, kind of around meaning, purpose, and belonging, I think.
Yeah, I love that. I just thought of, in my own perception, my own worldview, this just occurred to me. By definition, if neither the want nor a higher need are meant, by definition, it's a tragedy, right? And then if something redemptive is imparted, because usually the higher need is met, therein lies the redemptive content or the theme. But I think it's interesting, like, if everything's futile and nobody learns or grows from a conflict, that is tragic. And we say it all, oh, how tragic. That person went to their grave without really doing their homework, their spiritual homework. We say that in vernacular language. Oh, it's tragic.
Absolutely.
It is tragic when somebody has a spiritual opportunity thrown in their path and they kind of don't take it, or it's hard for us to judge from the outside. But I don't know. I just thought that was interesting. We do view things as tragic when nothing is gained.
Mm-hmm. And there's no transformation. And when you watch someone go through that, you feel, it's not you, because sometimes we can't see our own deficits and our own gaps.
Mm-hmm.
But when you can see it in a protagonist, you're going to learn from that too, that we all have challenges. And when the person in the story or the movie or whatever it's tragic. That's why it's such a tragedy, right? And
it's hard to watch, right? It's hard to watch people like bumper cars, maybe, Not really. Am I making sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like watching. It's like the slow motion train wreck, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think when we start to look at too what we're assigning on the meaning of like a want or a need, I think it and the tragedies start to come into play, right? The conflicts that we're facing, moving toward those things, and hopefully we're growing because we're focusing on that clarity of mind of why that's happening and realizing, okay, what needs to fundamentally change within, and which is what we see happen on, within the pages of a book or on the silver screen, right? We start to see that play out with the protagonist.
Mm-hmm. I wonder, for listeners, I don't want to repeat the entire book. We're trying to parallel and maybe dovetail off of it, but is there any value to using that Wizard of Oz example? Rene, I like when you talk about the wounded healer aspect, which is one of the sub-themes. So anyone mind if I quickly break down the Wizard of Oz just for discussion?
No, it's so profound and timeless. Absolutely.
Okay, and it really speaks to how story is metaphorical. So real quick, everybody will, and I do ask my students, I don't tell them. I ask, and eventually the answers come out. It's fascinating. But I say, you know, what is Dorothy's goal? And pretty much everyone will say to get home to Kansas. You know, once the story's in motion, you could say she runs away for a variety of reasons, and we'll get into that in a moment. She has a bigger want throughout. But once she's on that hero's journey or that rabbit hole tale or whatever you want to call it, the Odyssey, the goal is to get home to Kansas. She wants specifically the wizard to send her home to Kansas. So let's say the goal is to get home to Kansas. The want is for the wizard to send her home to Kansas. What's the actual need? What did she really need to do to get home to Kansas? Let's pretend this is a class. Anyone? She wants the wizard to send her home to Kansas. That's not how she got home to Kansas. How did she ultimately get home?
She had to click her heels 3 times.
Exactly. So then in the book, I say, yeah, and that doesn't sound very redemptive or resonant as far as plots go, but it's metaphorical. Mm-hmm. So then what is wanting the wizard to send her home symbolic of that might be universal in the human condition? What's the metaphorical version of her want is for the wizard to send her home?
It's that we want other people to make us happy, like our husbands or our children or our friends, and we're the only ones that can find happiness within. Right. It's external versus internal.
Right. And there's a million ways to word it, but yeah, looking for contentment outside of ourselves, or extrinsic rather than intrinsic, right? A million ways to word it. Looking for answers or contentment or well-being or tranquility, call it what you want, outside ourselves. Right. When all we need is within. And then in the book, I go into, there's literally a line that says, if I ever go looking for my heart's desire, I'll never look any further than my own backyard, basically. Okay, so the want on a really superficial level is wants the wizard to send her home. Needs to effing click her heels together to get home. Symbolic of or metaphorical for she wants answers outside of herself when she has the goods within. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Okay, so it may not be profound or earth-shattering to some people, but it's pretty bare bones. I think it's a great example. And so the theme, I guess what I try to impart in the book is the theme directly results from the resolution of that conflict. And again, if neither the want or the need are met, you're left with this feeling of futility, and that's called a tragedy. But then some would say, well, that's why it's a cautionary tale, because you walk away and go, oh, I ain't going to do that. I'm going to try something different. Maybe, Andrea, you have some Shakespearean tragedies where the audience walks away and goes, oh, yeah, family vendetta, bad. That's a dark road.
Yeah, or even Greek, going back to the Greek. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, examples? Because I put a couple in the book, but I'm not, an expert.
Oh, yeah. Well, certainly, of course, Romeo and Juliet. There, that's when I think of Shakespeare, that sort of comes up to the top there, and is probably mostly known by the listeners. But well,
what do you think though is the cautionary tale there? What are we not supposed to do? What is it warning us? Is it warning us against something?
I think so.
Tell me. I could guess.
I mean, I studied it many times, but I have a really bad memory. But as an adult right now, I would say that it warns us against impetuousness and youth and the dangers of being too passionate for your own good. I don't know.
Like impulsivity almost?
Yeah, impulsivity. Yeah.
But it's also about family vendetta, too. I think Titus is about that, like how dangerous it is. So when you have again, I don't know it that well either, but the Montague and the Capulets, that's the context. Isn't it almost like they were martyred for this ongoing vendetta that is so silly?
Yes, it's almost a lesson about the restrictive nature of cultural rules of morality, right? Extended from one generation to the next, right?
Yep. Yeah. I think so. I mean, it's both. It's probably about impulsivity on their part, and then sadly, they didn't choose the milieu into which they were born. And you could say that's socialization, or I think there's so many levels. Like, well, that's just ego versus love.
Yeah, I mean, you could extrapolate it to not only just the family vendettas, but you could extrapolate it to the history of interracial marriage. You could extrapolate it into the history of the gay rights movement. You could extrapolate it. I mean, in terms of the dynamics between family and culture and forbidden love, right?
Well, that's the big template, isn't it? Forbidden love. Well, that's why, a lot of LGBTQ stories up the stakes or choose, really repressive eras during which it wasn't okay because it becomes forbidden love, if that makes sense. So,
Yeah.
but that's what I was calling ego. Like, if you look at all these mechanisms in social conditioning that are all complete bullshit, it's really not humans acting according to their potential. It's the opposite. It's the base instincts and the base drives and, frankly, everything that I think we're evolving out of. But socialization, bad stuff.
Yeah, it I mean, I don't want to leap forward here in the conversation, but it becomes a relative of the devil's cocktail when these right stories.
Are we going to revisit that? Yeah, that gets kind of moralistic too when we get into
Well, let's see how it comes up, because here's kind of where I was going to take us, and you guys are already kind of dancing around where we could go with this. So in the book, it also outlines common character arcs and moving from self-doubt to empowerment, ignorance to insight. And so I'm curious and you guys, whoever wants to jump in first on this, is why do these particular arcs show up again and again in storytelling across cultures and time?
I think our mythologist should probably answer that one. Well, you could argue every hero's journey is about, doubt, like to empowerment. And Miyazaki films are always about becoming meek to empowered. But yeah, why in the hero's journey maybe do these always recur?
Because these are the universal themes of what it means to live a human life, right? These are the universal themes, stories, struggles, quandaries, problems that we face in living our lives, and myths show us that we're living a very personal experience of a universal rite of passage.
Of that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why these stories keep coming up, because every generation that's born has to live through these same universal rites of passage.
Yep. And that's largely what story does. It teaches us how to live in the world, and it is the means by which we impart, I call it the noosphere, right? But all these concepts, story is image-based, but it's really the way to impart the conceptual realm. Rene, I want to back up a little bit because I'd love for you to talk about the wounded healer. We didn't get into that, but sorry to backtrack, Virginia, just a tiny bit. It was a missed opportunity, because what I failed to say is, it is related to character arc, actually. When you look at Dorothy's journey, it's reflected in all the secondary characters' arcs as well. I won't break them all down, but I would say it's pretty obvious. The lion doesn't think he possesses courage, but only on that yellow brick road journey does he realize, oh, I actually did stick up for my friends. The Tin Man doesn't have a brain, but you know what? He solved a lot of problems on that yellow brick road journey. And then who's the third one? Scarecrow. Heart, yes. And so he realizes, wow, I have developed affinity and I have bonded with my friends on this journey. And so they all intrinsically had what they were seeking to begin with. So I wanted to say that all the character arcs support the main theme in a really well-written story. But a secondary theme is the wounded healer. Do you remember that concept well enough, Rene, to share that with us?
Well, I mean, I lived it, and I'm still somewhat living it, but not so much anymore. But Henri Nouwen, he wrote a book called The Wounded Healer, and that's the story of the Christ, right? And so with Dorothy, though, she didn't know how to get home. But she brought people along because her hunger to get home, which looks like on the outside is just the external, but on the inside, we all have the journey to self. I guess that's what we're talking about, being human. But the main journey is journey to self. And then once you discover the jewel of self, which is not, you didn't believe in yourself and you had the power the whole time. Every character in The Wizard of Oz, including Dorothy, and she brought everybody along with her. She's a wounded healer because she didn't have the answer, and she still led everyone. And through her curiosity and her, desires to go deeper, I guess, to follow the yellow brick road, she healed others.
Beautiful. Really, that's what I wish people would key into. I look for those luminaries in life. Not, Virginia and I have agreed. We've had a lot of people on this podcast that have a fire, and it's not just turning, lemons into lemonade, but they've had some event in their life that drove them to not just make sense of their trials and tribulations, but impart it to others, whatever their spiritual lessons were. Because the world can be a dark place. And so when I see somebody like Oprah, and younger generations effing hate her because they didn't grow up with her. Mm-hmm. I saw her become what she is, a mogul. They focus on the things they find suspect. I feel like, oh my God, thank God for the Oprahs of the world, because they are creating a platform so that others can not ride their coattails, but literally become their best selves as well. I love Ellen. She's been canceled as well. But it's like, oh my God, look at all the people whose lives she affected. And again, becoming their best selves because of the agency she created for herself. Is that a similar thing, Rene?
I think it is. I mean, the whole idea that, you can't, I don't even know why people get canceled when all they're trying to do is do something good. Because
people are cynical. Younger people are cynical of somebody with that much power, a woman with as much power as Oprah. Do you know what I mean?
They're okay with throwing the baby out with the bathwater because there's so much going on that they think they can toss one person's story, like In the Heights got canceled because they accidentally only had brown people and they didn't have any black people. Whoopsie. So it didn't win anything and no one went to see it. And it was just brilliant. And the same thing with White Lotus. It became canceled because it was a white man who wrote it, but all he was trying to do was enlighten the white people that were so engrossed in this system of injustice. We don't even see it when you're white. He's just trying to show everyone, but he got canceled because he accidentally got rich. Oops. So it's the same thing with photography. Now that I'm thinking about it, we were talking about photographs the other day, and the daguerreotype and all of that. They were so rare, right? They were so rare. And so they were so valuable. And now photographs are a million trillion, a dime a dozen, and they're not that valuable. Well, now in this day and age, there's so many people making movies. There's an Ellen, there's a Oprah, there's so many people. We can just throw the baby out with the bathwater. Yeah, you're trying to change the world, but we don't like this one thing that you did. And they throw the baby out with the bathwater, and they're not valuing the kind of effort that it took for us to stand on their shoulders, or for this new generation.
Yeah, that's a whole, right?
Yeah,
cancel culture. And I think there's a lot in there. Image saturated society, right? You didn't used to be able to see the Taj Mahal or some influencer sitting on top of an elephant. We see it all now, but I think what in there somewhere is like the gauge of authenticity is way off, and there is a cynicism. So it's like, know your allies when you see them, number one, and know somebody who has an authentic intention that's admirable without being cynical about their motives. Just because the outcome is, ooh, they got rich as a result. So I think there's a lot in there. There's a whole episode in there, in fact.
Well, Oprah, for sure. We watched Oprah be the wounded healer, and she's healed now. So people just don't see that she was ever broken, and that the people that followed her and watched her and read her, her books and her magazines, they became healed too. So that's what these journeys are about, is the transformation. And so when you have, in the book, you write that storytelling is to hold up the mirror to society. So all of these myths, all of these stories are holding up the mirror for ultimate transformation, which you always say, you and Virginia, and this whole podcast starts in the individual heart, and then it collectively goes out and literally changes culture. So, I mean, wounded healer, we're all broken. Everybody's on a journey to self. So we all must become wounded healers, unless we just become hermits.
Right. Or miss an opportunity, right? I mean, I like to think we're all threads in the big tapestry, right? And if we don't tell our stories, we're maybe robbing the collective of a very important worldview or thought form or paradigm. I think we're all being called upon to share our subjective experience, just my personal view.
No, I like that. So to go back to how Andrea brought up the angels and devils cocktail. So you do reference that in chapter 1 by David Phillips, where he calls the angels cocktail and the devil's cocktail not as moral judgments, but as outcomes. And I feel like we've been danced around that concept as well. So staying strictly with outcomes, how would each of you describe the difference between these two modes of storytelling?
Which two? Oh, a devil's and angels cocktail.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and how that ties into like the outcomes of like the
Well,
stories.
for listeners, I will define that a little bit, and I don't want to encroach on his brand or his lingo, but we do, and we didn't really get into the nitty gritty last week, but there are all kinds of chemicals that happen when we partake in story, whether it's around the campfire or in a theater or at the ballet, and most of them are the euphoric brain chemicals, right? If you're really invested and maybe even there's a cliffhanger that not only provokes or intrigues, but hooks you or addicts you, that's oxytocin. And then there's epinephrine and there's
Endorphins.
dopamine, endorphins, and they all are, I have the list if we want to go over them one by one, but they all collectively create trust, suggestibility, trust in the storyteller, but also those around the campfire, the tribe. And so there's a suggestibility, and that's why when we impart the thematic content through the resolution of the conflict, we do walk away with something redemptive because we're in that space. And then I think, what's the laughter one?
Just endorphins.
Yeah, endorphins. Like that is a heightened state of creativity. They're all like alertness, heightened memory for details, heightened creativity. And so the way I put it is simply put, when you walk out of a theater, you just feel more alive.
Mm.
And they call certain stories life affirming. That is beneficial to the survival of the species, but also the propagation of the tribe. It contributes to altruism. And Virginia, you've mentioned the Platonic values.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that's not survival based, equanimity, justice, beauty, aesthetics, like all these higher, loftier things that I think speak to human potential and capacity. Those are the chemical outcomes. So let's call that the angel's cocktail. And then by contrast, the devil's cocktail was cortisol and adrenaline. So in those films that may not have, it sounds very elitist, but that redemptive content, or may not have much to say, or some would say literary value or artistic integrity, meaning merit. These are all very judgmental terms. But if it's just about the bank heist and really nothing is being imparted about the human condition, you could be just feeding an addiction to cortisol and adrenaline within the individual. And then on the macro scale, an addiction to violence, or at the very least, a normalization of violence, right? And
and then
a tolerance for it. Yeah.
Perpetuating what you call a cultural addiction,
mm-hmm.
right? And it turns out to be, you don't use the word vapid, I do, but that's what the devil.
I use it a lot.
Well, in these pages, it's just that you mentioned that guy in the angels and the devil's cocktail, and then you liken it to the commercial, right? If they're you want to keep people addicted to the movies and the hype because then they'll buy more.
Mm-hmm. It is frowned upon to be a moralist in most circles. Artistic integrity is eroded by moralism. You're supposed to show all sides of the coin and not backseat drive, not be didactic, because that's propaganda, right? So there's an irony here. I end the chapter by saying, look, I don't think there's any good, bad, right, or wrong story to tell, but I think we know titillation when we see it. I think we know gratuitous, right, nudity, violence, you fill in the blank when we see it. Is it germane to the plot, or is it just for box office proceeds? And so it is in the eye of the beholder, but I make a case that, sometimes you show the yin with the yang, and there would be no conflict if you didn't show some violence or some darkness. I use Pan's Labyrinth as an example. It ran too dark for a lot of people's tastes. But all those violent images of the Spanish Civil War were necessary for the kingdom that Ophelia inherits to pay off, if that makes sense. So do you guys feel like most people know when it's gratuitous or if it's strictly there for titillation for the almighty dollar versus when it serves the thematic content, if that makes sense?
I think the average movie going public doesn't think about that at all.
Right.
Yeah.
And therein lies a problem, the problem. I don't know.
I think they know whether they think about whether the movie has engaged them, interested them, grabbed them, held them, whether from deep emotional content or whether from seat of the edge thrills content, right?
Mhm.
I think
Do you think though there's cultural value to people will call it catharsis? They'll say, "Ooh, I watched Bruce Willis kill a bunch of people. It was so cathartic." Guillermo del Toro is one of my favorite filmmakers, and he will say, along with a lot of horror um, auteurs, that you are embracing the psyche, the shadow side of the human psyche by giving us that catharsis, by bringing horror to life, or literally monsters to life. Guillermo del Toro would say, "I'm providing catharsis." I don't so much relate to that, but I can't argue with it. If I was that type of person who had some demons under my rug that I wasn't looking at, it might serve a purpose. Do you feel like there's value to just people getting their aggressions out, or having some kind of catharsis short of feeding that addiction to
Yeah.
cortisol and adrenaline?
it's a really good question. There's a lot of research that's conflicting, on whether or not violent films, violent video games, violent engagement leads to violent behavior. And there's arguments on both sides of that fence. I I guess I can only, like we all can only look at our lives ultimately through our lens as much as we try to clean it off, as much as we try to clear the fog off to look at things. Um, I guess I feel that there's, and this is just my personal perspective, there's already so much of humanity's deep demonic shadow that's being demonstrated in the world that we can see before our eyes every day on the news or social media or whatever we're going to look at it. So for it to be in film or theater, which I think has a little bit of a different collective cathartic experience, theater than film.
Mhm.
I think it has to be really skillfully done
Mm.
to me
Mhm.
to make it a redemptive work of art
Right.
in terms of taking us all to the deepest, darkest place for that catharsis.
Yeah, I think it's tricky. And, I think Aristotle even talked about that function of catharsis. And again, all the horror auteurs that I've listened to will say there is a release of a complex somehow because it's all unexamined. But yeah, I think it's a really tough thing to pull off. And I hope nobody gets me wrong. I'm not about puppies and daisies and rainbows. My work is dark, and it always has been. I have a very dark aesthetic, and I have dark outcomes. And but I did notice, I think all of us authors would relate, you write the kind of endings you need in your life. And that's what you're saying about wiping the lens. Like there's almost no way around it. I remember when I always wrote tragic endings because I could afford it. Or melancholy, right? All those words like bittersweet, melancholy, noir, very French, very ambivalent endings. But then suddenly, when I needed hope, I started writing happy endings. I was like, what the fuck was that?
Well, I want to comment on that because I'm a huge Stephen King fan. And if anybody follows me on social media will know that, and we share the same birthday. So just ironic, my favorite author and I have the same birthday. But I've always been enthralled with Stephen King's work. And on screen, it's definitely more for the thrill factor. If you've actually sat down and read his books before, you've seen them on the silver screen, the ones that have gone there. There's a huge difference in them.
Isn't it? They're more intricate psychologically.
They are. They're more of a psychological thriller, the actual books. I mean, there's definitely some grit and like Under the Dome that became a series. I'll just use that one for example. It went very sci-fi on TV, where the book is very gritty. I mean, there's literally rape in there. It's pretty dark, and it's all just if basically the worst of of something could happen in a town could happen to where it goes very dystopian. Here's it and. For me, so to go more to it, and I've realized this more as I've gone, through my clinical studies and have gone into, sitting with people in a clinical setting, is what has always drawn me to Stephen King is because it does, for me, put in front that, what is the dark, shadow side of humanity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is primal man? We'll just basically say that. Just basic human lizard brain instinct of what we could do. And so for me, it's always brought that curiosity of, well, why does that happen? And so I think it really, for me, when I think about, and I love horror movies, I'm not going to deny that. I think it depends on the person, like where they're at. So that's why I say in a clinical setting, I think of it's where that person is in their life's journey and how they're going to perceive through their lens. And so going back to what Andrea said, which is why I think there's that debate between, do these horror movies, these violent games and stuff, do they affect people? Well, if somebody's not grounded and isn't in a good lens, is it going to influence them in an adverse way? Probably. If somebody is grounded and is going in with more of a curiosity and is questioning and open to turning that kaleidoscope, as I always say, and trying to perceive from multiple viewpoints of understanding, it probably won't affect them as adversely. So I think that has a lot to do with, I think, when someone walks. And I think the same things when like something's really like, let's just go with that, joyous, euphoric feeling. Somebody who's not in that frame of mind goes and sees a happy movie or supposed to be like a rom-com, right? Are they going to walk out with that same good feeling as somebody who is in that Twitter-pated,
If I could jump in though,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to make the case that intention transcends. So I always go back to inspiration, but I think the intention does transcend at some point. I agree with you 100%, but you're also kind of solidifying something for me. The idea, even in the hero's journey of facing off with the monster, right? Whether it's, I'm going to use Beowulf as an example, that's a shadow side of humanity that you got to face your demons to conquer them, right? And I think that would be the argument for these kind of, for horror, is there's a shadow side to, yes, our basest instincts, things we don't want to face in the human condition or ourselves, and you have to confront them to conquer them. So I think, the Odyssey, the Cyclops, like all behemoths, and maybe even some of Guillermo del Toro's monsters. It is the archetype of facing off with the psyche, because even a complex that is resolved through catharsis is something unexamined that's not being looked at. So then where does that lapse into? Glorifying violence is a word you hear a lot, right? Or
That's
maybe
good, yeah.
normalizing violence or habituating people to violence. To me, it is always going to go back to the intention. So I have had 20 years, trust me, of students that will say, oh, I went into gaming, and it's not just because it's the only job I could get, even though I want to be in feature animation. I went into game, they won't say that, but they go into gaming and then they have to rationalize it. So I've literally had 20 years of my students saying, oh, no, it doesn't habituate people to violence just because you're beheading zombies for hours on end. It actually is good for dexterity. Studies have proven studies have proven surgeons are much more dexterous if they've played video. It's like, come on. So there's a lot of, rationalization of the way things are, but you got to trust the studies, right? Even like the addictive. I love that there's a lawsuit right now, by the way. Are you guys aware of the tech companies? Yeah. I love that there's a lawsuit. Every other product, if it's known to be addictive, and you don't put the warning labels, or you continue to, rather than changing the formula, you continue proffering it, you're liable. So I love that the studies are now showing that young people are easily addicted to social media and scrolling and engagement and likes, and they've been propagating it knowing full well what the studies show. Sorry, am I preaching?
No.
No, it's true.
There's no hiding anymore.
Well, yeah, and I think that goes back to what you're just saying, I mean, like the studies, I mean, with a lot of the young people, because everything's it's instant gratification, right? And they're getting it's like, and going back to the whole devils and angels cocktail, here's an interesting thing. Like, the angels cocktail is supposed to make you feel good, right? That's the purpose of it. But we're seeing with social media with the younger generation, because they are getting that dopamine fix, that oxytocin, the endorphins kicking in, that they're getting this, high. And then when all of a sudden they're not instantly getting that gratification, their patience goes down, their self-worth goes down. And so we start seeing the adverse effects.
Well, talk about intention. Look at the intention of the social media company, right? To addict the user. And so looking at the narrative of what is the story that the social media companies are telling, but what's their want? What's their
right.
And the outcome.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. So let's break down these chemicals, since we've been dancing around them a little bit more. So let's talk about the chemical story. So dopamine, let's just go there. So that's our intrigue and the anticipation. So in the chapter, Nick, you described dopamine as the chemical tied to anticipation, focus, motivation, essentially what hooks us into a story. So I want you to talk a little bit about that, and then we'll get into
I have them highlighted. So dopamine, and that is, I think, what we're talking about with this addiction, right? You burn out synapses if the fix needs to be higher and higher each time, so it can have pluses and minuses. The reward, isn't that the reward system, or is that oxytocin? No, it's dopamine.
Yes, part of it.
Activates your brain's reward system.
Yeah. So that's the danger of the addictive quality of, TikTok, for example, is, like you say, you need more and more to sustain that high. So, but anyway, I have written down in the chapter, it heightens awareness, at its best, heightens awareness and a memory for details later. And it increases focus, alertness, motivation, and inspiration. So I know, like I said, when I walk out of a movie and I just feel more alive, it's because I'm high on dopamine. I don't have much to say about it, but it is the cliffhanger, right? Everybody, has it down to a science, especially streaming content. How do you make sure they'll come back for the next installment? Or in a really good book series, how do you make sure they'll buy the next book? You hook them with that cliffhanger.
Suspense.
Yeah. I mean, is there much to say about dopamine?
Well, and here's the thing with dopamine too, is a lot of people think, like, it does do that. It does hook us, right? It does bring us in, because it adds that layer of, well, what's going to happen next? So you're like hanging on, to the seat of your pants, right? To see what happens. But I think dopamine, I mean, if you think about, like, if you're creating something, you're sitting down, like the artist who's starting to sketch out or lay out what it is they're going to paint, dopamine kicks in as well. So there is where it can play into a contentment as well.
Well, what about sex, drugs, and rock and roll? You know how they used to say, those are the three things that they always said. Well, I think it's your prefrontal cortex. I didn't memorize it. It downloads those experiences, and then our bodies are made where we want more of it and more of it. And so that's that addiction. So it activates your dopamine, and then your brain wants to return to it. So like in a singing lesson, if a student hits a really great note and I want them to really be able to manage that note again and again exactly that way, we stop and we talk about how you got to get excited so that your body will want to return to that. And like, oh, I'm so good, and just be like, oh, I do that at home all the time. No, you got to get excited so your brain goes, oh, she likes this. I'm going to return to this exact balance of the singing. So it's the same thing with sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Your brain wants to return to it. So the dopamine is that addiction that you get on TikTok, and it is the addiction that you get because your brain wants to go back to the thing that makes you feel so good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I just want to jump in for 1 second. And the problem we're having now is that social media and the addiction to social media is causing dopamine exhaustion.
Mm.
Oh,
It's the fact that the brain just keeps creating these mini hits of dopamine over and over and over, and the constant digital stimulation, right, burns out your stores of dopamine.
Mm.
wow.
So then you end up being exhausted. You can't focus, moody, right? And your brain chemistry then is off because your normal dopamine reward system is used up or imbalanced or
Do you think we
is
do?
tapped out.
Let's assume, they say technology increases exponentially, and I think we've all seen it. Let's say technology is not going anywhere. Social media is not. I think we're regulating on an as needed basis, or we're trying, right? But the genie's out of the bottle.
Yep.
So let's say we're not going back. Will we adapt? Will our brain chemistry adapt to the overstimulation, the image saturation, all the things we're talking about? Like I kind of hinted at earlier, it's not part of the human condition yet to be able to see all those. We used to have to open an encyclopedia to see some animal, do you know what I mean, in the jungles in Far East Asia. And now we just can see it in the background if an influencer is on the top of a mountain in the Himalayas. Like we have access to everything now. And I'm not even talking about porn yet, right?
Yeah.
So if we have access to all of it, will we adapt?
I think our brains will. I think, and I think we're starting to see that in the younger generations who have grown up always having technology, that there is definitely a difference with the way their synapses are wired. That they're not, because, we have a lot of synapses, and we prune them too, but I think that theirs are shorter because they're used to so much stuff coming instantly. It's not like where we had, like you said, we had to go back and research, and we could just jump on Google or go onto ChatGPT and go like, "Hey, tell me about this," and get the information. We had to remember, and that's the other thing too with dopamine is it also is besides just hookiness, it's part of what helps us with memory.
Right. That's why I want to get back to the positive.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of in the book, the case that I'm making is like, yes, we're always adapting. I think we need to have some adults in the room, right, that are applying tough love and regulating what our children are exposed to, make sure they still have executive function and that they're not burned out or that they're not overstimulated or exhausted, as Andrea put it. We're always regulating that. But let's say at its best, it's almost like being in love. That's how I put it. When you are in that theater, and I'm sorry, I keep using that as an example, in the cinema, and you're in there, hook, line, and sinker. So you're suggestible and you can receive the redemptive content. It is a state that's almost like being in love, right? And that is, we always take risks in life, right? Breakups. If you break down the chemistry behind love, it takes the romance out of it, but it's very chemical. And so if you're addictive and you're suddenly abandoned and somebody dumps you, man, that's hard to come back from. So I think but that's life, right? The risk and then the price. So, but at its best, I would say that state of being in love does open you up, and I list the Platonic values to altruism, appreciation, gratitude, equanimity, and personal liberty. So, yes, there's always a downside, and maybe it's about moderation. I don't know.
I think that's really like it's the interesting marriage between dopamine and oxytocin, right? That heavy love, connection, deep feeling, bonding hormone, right? And
you're right. I did lapse into the outcomes of oxytocin. Oops.
yeah, that's okay. I think that the two, like you said in your writing about the Angel's Cocktail, the two are very served up in the same martini, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, ultimately, I mean, you end the chapter with epigenetics. And so, as you guys are talking about, well, will our brains adapt to this shortened, this short attention span, whatever you would call it? How are we going to adapt? And now we have AI. And so, end the chapter with, wow, you guys, we can pass shit on to a baby in the womb if we can get it together right now. The next generation can be born with these things. It's amazing.
That's kind of what I meant. Well, I say get our hands in the clay, right?
Yeah.
But I, a moment ago, just said, let's be adults in the room and let's regulate, I do think if people had a better understanding, which is why I wrote my book, have a bigger understanding of intergenerational trauma, what can be done about it, have a better understanding of the power of epigenetics. It is almost unfathomable, the potential of epigenetics if we could just grasp it. Right now, they really focus on chemical factors and lifestyle factors. How about thoughts and feelings? How about thought forms and paradigms?
Yeah.
Whole realm of, that whole conceptual realm or the noosphere. Like, let's just believe in the potential to pass on higher thought forms and paradigms, and it'll be proven eventually, but why not just believe we have that power right now,
Well, it's like you're writing about in this chapter where you say your brain doesn't know whether what you're imagining is actually in front of you or if you're imagining it, right?
Right.
Right.
Well, and again, this is empirical, by the way. Your body will produce a burn under hypnosis with the suggestion of a burn. People walk on hot coals all the time, and Abraham Hicks would say, even with the cottage industry that is dieting, she's like, way more important than what you're putting in your body is what you believe about what you're putting in your body. So again, I don't think it was in this chapter, but in the story and belief chapter, I tell a lot of stories about doctors, and this is empirical, but it's, of course, their own papers and theses. They will say, yeah, I had beginner's luck because I didn't know any better with my patients, and they solved all kinds of, like, I think some of them were funguses and like incurable diseases in their patients because they hadn't seen too much.
Mm-hmm.
And once they saw too many statistics, they lost their alchemy. And so there's all kinds of examples of, I guess it's mind over matter. That sounds a little reductive, but that's how we're wired. The history of medicine is the history of the placebo effect, period.
Well, and I think that goes, I'm going to just bring that right back to, and looking at dopamine in itself, that's what it is. It's that part that allows us in the first place to have movement engagement. So it's what helps us have that curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why we want to know more and we progress forward. Because, it doesn't create the meaning, but I think it definitely is what gives that stimulus to us, to want to be fulfilled in some way.
Yeah.
Or like you're saying, like with the doctors, they didn't know, but they're like, but this is working. So there's got to be more to this, type thing. So it makes them keep doing what's beneficial. And I think that's the big thing for us, so yeah, it is part of our pleasure principle, which, brings in the oxytocin. And that's when we move into that, because that gives us the empathy, the trust, the bonding, allows us to be vulnerable, to be able to relate to people.
Yeah, I think the umbrella, even, bringing endorphins into the equation, I think the umbrella is that it's only heightened emotions that get mapped on our worldviews. Everything else just kind of falls away. And that speaks to epigenetics as well. Mm-hmm. How are we augmenting our database of innate responses? We're given a lot of instincts, but we're kind of, because I think somebody mentioned the very sophisticated prefrontal cortex, we can actually take new novel responses to stimuli that maybe no human has ever encountered and add to that database in real time, right, during our lifetimes. And then the suggestibility. We're probably the only ones that can vicariously internalize values or morals into our worldview or value system by, you name it, gossip, propaganda, the narratives that society propagates,
Yeah.
I don't know if we're all over the place, but I feel like what I was trying to say is all these chemicals we're talking about are inherent in storytelling. And so it's just another illustration of the fact that story is the biggest means by which we transform. I want to quickly give an example because I just saw the Bruce, what's his name? Bruce Springsteen video last night. Have you guys seen that yet?
No.
Yeah, I'm a fan. I think he's amazing. You know, I never bought an album, but of course I respect him and his career and what he's always stood for, and I like him as a musician. The song is a little pedantic and it's a little literal, but he does, you know, there's a great video if you Google it about Minneapolis and what's happening. And again, it's not high art because it's so narrative. I'm contradicting my entire book, but it's not it's not conceptual. It's very slice of lifey and very preachy and narrative and blah, blah. But it's, to me, I was like, oh my God. So many of us have our hands in the air and we don't know what we can do. Is it really going to pay off to write a letter to my senator or my congressperson? And we feel like we don't know what we can do. That video has shot to #1 globally.
Wow.
Globally. So even for people that just hear a little news story about what's going on in the US and have a theoretical understanding of it, but aren't living it, they get it. And so I just had that thought, like, that's going to be more powerful than anything in this ongoing narrative. Art. You know, nobody else knows what the F they can do, but then when people all over the world are downloading that and making it #1, at least the awareness is heightened about this issue. You know, the issue I'm talking about, right? Like fascism.
Mm-hmm.
Authoritarian. Sorry?
I was spelling it. I was
okay, right. In case we didn't beat you over the head, yeah.
Well, and I think it goes back to the fact that, you know, when people, and they may not understand what's drawing them to, I haven't seen it yet either, Nick, but what's drawing them to go see, you know, this film that's out by Bruce, you know, the boss is, right, the bonding is happening because there's something internally happening, even if they can't consciously put words to it, that they're like, oh, wait, I recognize things in here. I'm understanding.
It's a music video. It's just a music video. But I mean, it spells it out. There's no question, even if you weren't watching the news and, you know, you were in some corner, some jungle. Okay, I don't want to sound racist. If you were high on a mountaintop and you were living the life of a hermit and then you saw this video, you would definitely get it. And you'd think, oh, that's not good.
but music moves us, right? Because music is a way of, another way of sharing stories, sharing commonality.
Yeah, I just emotion. Thought that said a lot to me, that nobody knows what they can do. And we're all feeling futile and watching it happen, right? And they say, I don't know, like, what's the definition of being on the wrong side of history? And a great meme I saw said, what would you have done, you know, during the rise of fascism or in the 1930s in Europe? You're doing it now.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Anyway, but I thought, wow, it's #1 globally. That says something.
Well, and it goes back, you know, just even what you just put out there. It's why stories are so important in our lives, right? Because it's supposed to help, as it's been brought up. And I can't remember if it was Rene or Andrea, or maybe both of you guys said about holding up the mirror, how you bring that up. You know, again, it's reflecting back to us what is happening, and on, and you know, taken out of the conscious level on a primal level. So, you know, that's basically our nervous system and our primal brain. We can understand that through the different hormones that go through our body and how our nervous system is reacting.
Yeah. And the video bypasses, again, that mechanism where if somebody's trying to persuade you, you just dig your heels in more and, you know, rely on your confirmation bias and your identity politics. And it's actually an anthropological principle that, it's like the red dress syndrome. Oops, I voted for Trump. That was a mistake. But you know what? I'm going to dig my heels in more just to rationalize and prove to myself I didn't do the wrong thing in the first place. So you bypass all that pride and ego and, I guess, mind dominance, right? When it's emotional. And I do think the video is very narrative and it spells it out. It's not strictly visceral. but it all works together. It's art, put it that way. And so, yeah, people can argue with art, I guess, but
You can argue with it, but I think that's what, but all art is story, and that's what I think it is in that very basic form where it passes cognition.
Yep, there you go. Yeah, that's what I was kind of getting at. You circumvent that fucking brain, man.
Likes to hold us up. All right, so we didn't really get into endorphins, but endorphins are definitely our release that's releasing the energy and getting us to do stuff. But let's look at cortisol and adrenaline, because that is our fear and survival hormones that like to kick in, those chemicals that are tied to fear, threat. It's our fight flight responses that we have. So I want to understand with storytelling, I know we touched on it a little bit, how that crosses into maybe conditioning us more than putting it into a catharsis framework.
Well, I guess I always go first, but I hope you guys jump in. Again, I just feel like the intention transcends. And so we pointed out, well, you can't have the redemptive content or thematic content that results from the conflict resolution without showing, right, the violence or shadow side of humanity, or so, but then is it in the eye of the beholder when it starts to border on titillation for the almighty dollar, or gratuitous content for the almighty dollar, or some other I don't think anyone's out to habituate people to violence just as an end in itself. Isn't it usually for the almighty dollar or for persuasion or power in some way, right? Propaganda, political campaigning uses fear mongering a lot, and that but that's for posturing in some way. But anyway, I think we know it when we see it, and I think the intention transcends, but there is some gray area probably.
I sometimes wonder if it does help propagate that us versus them mentality in some cases, though.
In the book, I use the example of the Cold War. We had several decades of Russians as bad guys. And then once that was no longer okay, we went to aliens. And that comes and goes, right? In the 50s, that was a big one. But I do like that better because it's still like otherizing and it's still us against them, which is awesome for the tribe or the species. But, we live in a huge universe and we might learn we have more neighbors. So I don't like that it's kind of perpetuating the tribal instincts of otherizing, but I think it's better than the Russians. I don't know. What do you guys think? We need our bad guys. We need our villains.
I think it's so interesting living in these times, because when I think about that sort of the cortisol, stress, adrenaline response in watching a film, right? A thriller, like going to see what was the Tom Cruise one about the jet airplanes? I forget what the name of that was. Where he was flying Top Gun or whatever.
Oh, Top Gun. Yeah, there was.
Right. The adrenaline and the cortisol. Is he going to crash? Is he not? And that kind of thing. But then I look at what's going on and how, through what's gone on in Minneapolis or through what's been going on in the political zeitgeist for the past year or the past 2 years or the past 6 years or the past 10 years, I feel like there are people who are living in culture in their real life being trapped in the cortisol, adrenaline, fear cycle just from watching the news, from watching what's going on in politics.
Absolutely. I limit my intake. It seems lackadaisical and it seems like I'm part of the problem and not the solution, but I've been through a lot the past couple of years. And so again, what you put your attention on grows. So I'm selective and I try to focus on solutions and not beating the drum of the grievance or the problem. Nobody knows what to do right now.
Yeah.
But I wanted to chime in on that a little bit too, though, because do you remember the term, I think it was in the tripartite state, that was was that Plato or Socrates, that tripartite state idea, the spirited element. I think it was Plato. I might be wrong. It was one of those guys. But the idea is, we all have our gifts and we all should contribute them. And, a society works best when we all know our place. And so it's a little elitist, like, oh, you have a ruling class. We've seen the downside of democracy for sure. You should probably need a license to vote, or, we've seen the downside of democracy, but it's too elitist for some. But the idea is there's something called the spirited element. Those that want glory, they want their parents to be proud of them. They want to protect the tribe back home by going off to war. We need those guys that want to shoot them up. Maybe not video games, you know what I mean? But we need our protectors. We need our warriors. But I feel like there's something going on where the Western version of that is off base. There's plenty of tribal or indigenous cultures that have a different definition of what it is to be a warrior, if that makes sense. Is there some fucked up Western European version of masculinity, the warrior archetype that needs to be revisited? Am I making any sense to you guys?
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's a whole episode.
But isn't that what we're talking about? We're training our men specifically to conflate violence. Just look at ICE.
Mhm.
What the hell? How were they raised, and what is wrong in that recipe? It's what we're talking about,
absolutely.
A lifetime of taking in stories that glorify violence, not just protecting the family unit I fucking love America. I love our Constitution. It's a luxury that we get to have high ideals, but there is some indigenous tribal version of what it is to be a warrior that is, has been left in the dust. I
got to drop this in there, which goes along with it, and I don't know how to strain this soup, but
I've never heard that.
But the whole anti-feminist, it's the fault of feminism and women in the workplace and liberal ideas that men now don't know how to be men, and that there's this whole incel backlash, and so that's an intrinsic part of what's going on in the zeitgeist right now. And so how do we strain that soup?
Let me make sure I understand, because you and I have, we've touched on that in this podcast quite a bit, but it sounds a little bit like, I call it the manosphere. So that includes the incels and, and I've defended men a little bit and said, just like women have to be all things to all people all the time and the job never ends, men are expected to be sensitive now and still be a warrior and a protector. So nobody's off the hook. We're always having identity crises. And I think the war between the sexes is silly. Let's just all be better humans. But that said, obviously patriarchy is on its way out. But it sounds a little bit like you're saying maybe small-minded people are so threatened by feminism over the past, 40, 50, 60 years, that's why they're digging their heels in and being hyper masculine. Is that?
I'm saying it's one ingredient.
Yeah.
It's one ingredient in the soup.
Right. And then when you have, like Kamala, for example, nope, we're not ready. Nope. That pendulum's going to swing way back. You're absolutely right. It's like we said, I think a couple of weeks ago, they're like dinosaurs trying to preserve the Cretaceous.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was going to say, it seems
it's
like
a big narrative. Sorry.
It is. And it seems like we get hyper focused on one viewpoint or the other, depending on what, is an alignment for us individually. Right. And it's like, I feel like sometimes we forget objectivity and subjectivity live together and are bridged by the commonality of responsibility and accountability.
Wow.
Responsibility and accountability.
Yeah.
Well,
Go ahead.
I had I don't know if this is related, but I had the thought, it's why we all need to keep telling these stories, because we're not really all going to be able to turn that kaleidoscope, to use your analogy, right? Or step outside of our, wipe our lens, to use Andrea's. We're not all fully capable of seeing all sides of an issue and being judicious. But isn't that why we need to keep having the conversations?
Yeah. And that's what you also wrote that towards the end of the chapter about the point of trying to reach our true capacity, and what you always say, like the evolution where we need to propel ourselves to our full potential. So in order to reach our full potential, whether everyone agrees or not, that there should be immigrants in the US, that's not the point. The point is civility. The point is being able to have a discourse and finding our common ground. And it doesn't have to be where we're at right now, which is we're all caught in that cycle, whatever the cycle of anger and, not being seen and not being heard and defending our accidental red dress choice. And everybody's just caught.
Privilege.
And nobody's thinking about the outcome. Like, wait, don't we want to have civility? Don't we want to have civil discourse? And don't we want to be united ultimately? So, I guess we are repeating our bullshit because, there's genocides going on way back when, and still these things are still happening.
I think one of the times you came on, you used the example of, a family sitting at a dinner table and there's a conflict. It is about agreeing to what is the desired outcome here, right? What's the goal? What's the desired outcome? But I will say we are repeating cycles and we're not taking opportunities for growth. But on a really good day, I think we can all see the fact that we're not silencing and erasing, and that's not, we can't even say politically correct anymore, but it's not woke. It's not woke to erase Indigenous people, the LGBTQ community. It's not okay to silence and erase. I mean, that is progress. In my own lifetime, I've seen major progress, but we are seeing the backlash. And if you we're kind of talking in real general terms here, but if you take that resistance, call it the manosphere, call it the incels, call it the conspiracy theorists, if you put the whole MAGA community as over 50% of Americans, it's almost like they're so terrified. There is a backlash, but it's creating a conflict that we can look at. I'll shout out to Diane, our friend Diane. She once said, well, I didn't mean to lose my temper, but we had to have something to address. Right? And it wasn't between the two of us. She just said, in this situation, on a better day, I wouldn't have lost it, but now there's something on the table to address. So I feel like it goes back to, all strife signals change and all conflict signals resolution. It's a really tough moment, but I'm hopeful. And I'm going to say one more thing, because I love when, life informs these conversations in real time. So maybe, Rene, like the idea is, if we have an outcome, whether it's utopian or completely fantastical and out of reach, better to aspire than to kind of, I don't know, just live in the muck and the mire and keep telling the same story. So I kind of have a love-hate relationship with aspirational storytelling. So like that Netflix Hollywood thing that told a beautiful story about what if there was no racism in Hollywood? What if the Oscar went to, the Asian actress rather than somebody in drag playing an Asian? And it was all like, what if Rock Hudson got to be himself? And there's a lot of responsibility in that, but I actually love it now because I've seen Heated Rivalry. Have any of you watched that? Yet again, it's kind of like the Bruce Springsteen thing. It's literally the top watched streaming content ever, and people are rewatching it literally 3 times. And it's a big, I think you used the word cultural zeitgeist a minute ago. It's a big moment. And so it's aspirational LGBTQ storytelling where, I remember the first time I saw a movie where nobody died of AIDS, nobody was a tragic figure, everybody was rooting for the love story, right? Instead of cringing and it's very clear to people in the community, like, that is literally the first time we weren't tragic characters. And anyway, so this particular one is like, and I'm going to share the article with you, Virginia, but she broke it down and said, yeah, there must be some kind of oxytocin fix, because every time you think things are going to go south and the same old forces are going to be at work, it's the opposite. So then when they're busted, okay, they're on rival teams, yet they love each other. And so they're supposed to be hating each other in the media, but they're fucking privately, right? But then they fall in love, and oops, the parent sees them together in a, and so suddenly they're outed with, and it's, I said in the 90s, I think. And then you think it's going to go south, but it's a beautiful scene where the mother says, I'm sorry I made you feel that you couldn't be yourself. He apologizes for I tried, and she's like, sweetheart, don't. And it's like, oh, that never would have happened in the 90s, but wow, really aspirational. And those are the models we need to be seeing more and more. Does that make sense a little bit? Every expectation is dashed. Oh, and then like they can't come out because their hockey career would go to hell in a handbasket. And they've got all kinds of endorsements, and that's the moneymaker for the entire family. And yet the dude decides to call his partner down. Everybody else, they won. I forget, what level in the league, but they won a game. All the partners are coming down and hugging on the ice. And the dude's looking up, and he's in a closeted relationship, and he says, fuck it. And he waves him down, and they make out in the middle, and they show all the reactions around the world of people watching it on TV. It's like, that would never happen. But imagine being a kid that's not out, that's tortured, and seeing that example.
Yeah. But that's the reverse, right? So the storytelling that we always talk about from the beginning, the exposition, and then the conflict, and then the rising action, and whatever, the denouement. So here they are, they're flipping it around. They're like not taking it, they're not upping the stakes, they're not doing the third act tragedy or whatever. They're showing the opposite. They're flipping it. So it's a wonderful brand new way of storytelling, and it might be aspirational and Pollyanna, but it's going to have a place in society, and that's one of the goals of storytelling, right? And we were just talking about, when you said the Diane thing, that, well, now we have something to address. We're talking about conflict resolution. All of life is storytelling. And what is storytelling? It's conflict resolution. And so when there's a conflict, Michael Mead, he's like a mythologist. Andrea, you know him.
Yeah.
When this all started going down with the current administration, he talks about a seed splitting. And he goes into how, this conflict, the seed splitting, and then growing, and then growth, and then, the solving, the resolution of a problem. And so now we have something on the table. Everyone's fighting, but not to be Pollyanna or aspirational. But as you just said, Nick, there is hope that now that it's, all getting spewed out, that we might be able to pick up the pieces and build something that has redemption and that resolves all of it.
From the ashes, I've said, like you got to die to yourself to be reborn individually. That's the Christ archetype. You got to die to be reborn. It is globally, it's scary. If we survive and, and there's no nuclear war, we're going to be great.
Yeah. So
and climate change, it's hard to see the outcome, but I do think right now it's not just the United States. I think authoritarianism is taking hold everywhere. There's a belief that people can't govern themselves, that democracy is on its way out. And then you see uprisings, even the Arab Spring, all the way through what's happening in Iran right now. I think there is a cutting edge philosophy. The world is a smaller place than ever. And we are ushering out a lot of patriarchy, but also a lot of disempowering narratives about humanity, oppressive governments that, I won't go on, but take rights away from entire subcultures and populations of people. That doesn't fly anymore. So, right, it seems way far off, but I love the uprisings all over right now.
It's interesting. I don't know if you follow Heather Cox Richardson, but she has, as a historian, and one of the things she's been saying recently is it's bad, but it's going to get worse. It's bad, but it's going to get worse before we turn the page on the chapter, right?
Yeah, that sounded depressing. Okay. Is that supposed to be inspirational, though?
Well, because she's talking about the overreach of the federal government and what their attempts are. And, going back to, not to hammer on a point, but going back to the idea of patriarchy, when Rene Good was shot and then he, kills her and then calls her a fucking bitch as her dead body drives away in the car. And then there are videos that come out of ICE saying to other women, well, didn't you learn from
Oh shit, really?
Yeah. And then
Holy fuck.
then there was also another one where there have been commentators from the right coming out and saying, oh, it's really disturbing how all these white liberal wine moms are now going out and becoming part of these, ICE tracking community organizations, and that these white liberal wine moms are really going too far. And it's the justification of the violence against women and violence against Rene Good as a gay woman, as being infuriating to the
enemy. She's the enemy.
to the ICE agent who shot her in the face. I mean,
well, look, I'm sorry, I got to jump in. I feel like Chicken Little. The sky is falling. I wrote my book, 5-6 years ago now?
mm-hmm.
And so my hands are a little in the air, and I am a little defeatist about this, because when you've spent your whole life trying to get people to look beyond at the end of their nose, and now, we all love it when an ex-MAGA comes out and says, oops, I didn't know what I was voting for. We all love that. But I do feel like, okay, well, I tried, and here we are.
Yeah, exactly.
I tried my damnedest my entire life, and here we are. But did anyone see SNL last night?
Mm-mm.
It's a hysterical skit about, a family, and you can just guess the kids are Gen Zers, not even millennials, but Gen Zers. And the mom's like, oh, yeah, I want to sit you guys down and tell you I've had a come to Jesus moment, and I now see that. And she starts saying all the ways that, the price of an egg, that's what I wanted. And he is a businessman, don't get me wrong. He's still a good businessman. But now I'm seeing I didn't ask for A, B, C, and D, and they're just turning blue in the face and trying not to strangle her. So I feel that's how I feel. I don't know. Careful what you ask for.
Yeah. We went to a restaurant last night. In my husband's family, there's 12 cousins, and all the uncles and aunts are dead. So all, that whole
section.
Section, they're all dead. So it was just the cousins. We did a family reunion, went to a Hungarian restaurant because they were Hungarian. And the chef / owner kept coming over and trying to make it as Hungarian as possible. And, talking about the memories of food and how they're connected to the family. And it was just beautiful. But then he loved it so much that I'll use your term, Nick, he started holding court. And bless his heart, he started talking about the current administration.
No.
And, I'm not going to say that everybody at the table is a Democrat liberal. Not at all. So he took his chances and he did not shut up. But by the end, he had me almost in tears, and I gave him a hug in the end, because he was talking about Hungary and dictatorship and how they lived through it and how they got through it and how we're going to get through it and how much he loves this country. And it was he's so brave. He might lose business, and he's talking like this.
Okay, I thought he was on the other side.
Oh,
sorry.
No, he was.
Okay,
no.
So we need more people like that. The mayor of Minneapolis, what's his name? We need more Bruce Springsteens. We need more Gavin Newsoms. We need the mayor of Minneapolis. He's a hottie. I can't even think of his name. We need more people with, what it's called? Courage. We need more people with courage.
Mm-hmm. Cowardly lion. Back to the...
I've heard business owners say, I went out and demonstrated, and I know I could lose business, but you know what? What's at stake? Our humanity, not just democracy, but our humanity. It's not even a question. For me.
Me either.
Yeah.
remember, Andrea, when I was like doing something on my Instagram and you were like, delete your Instagram before you come back into the country because they're going to see that you're on the wrong side and you might get in trouble when they take your phone. And I thought, if they do, I'm going to be willing to have them take my phone because I am not.
Yeah, it's called principle. Would you die for your principles?
Right.
I don't know. I've never had Hitler with a gun to my head. You know what I mean? I've never been in that position, but I like to think I would die for my principles. Don Lemon's another example right now. Have you been following that?
Yeah, that was he's been in the news a lot over the past 5 years.
Well, no, right now
Yeah.
he's
but right
literally
now, yeah.
it's the assault on journalism. It's the assault
On the free press, yeah.
telling the truth. And so a moment ago when I was saying I feel like Chicken Little, I was trying to say it just couldn't be more obvious the role of storytelling in culture. When you have one side not just spinning the narrative in the media, but literally saying the sky is green. Don't trust your eyeballs. The sky is green. And then you have sycophants. Now I'm mixing metaphors, but it's kind of like the emperor's new clothes.
Yeah.
Where everybody's just agreeing to lie through their teeth and agree that the sky is green because if you say it enough, it's true. It's not enough to say narrative is the the currency of propaganda or political campaigning. It's at an all-time high. If you don't see it now, then I give up on humanity. And I wrote my book 5 years ago. Do you know what I mean? And you can go in science fiction, go back to Brave New World or, any number of sci-fi cautionary tales and see that, yeah, we've seen this coming for a long time.
Or it's very repetitive. Like even Emperor's New Clothes, if you read it back in the 1700s or whenever you pass that story along, who could have known what it would mean by now?
History repeats. Yes. Did I say Emperor's New Groove? I hope not.
No, you said clothes.
Okay.
I say
I am what I am. You said clothes, but I thought I'm a Disney product. I might have said groove. Oops.
All right. Well, I'm going to still close, and I'm not going to even ask what my last question was before that is because it was basically, how do we redeem darkness through catharsis? And I think we've danced around that in multiple ways already. So we won't even go there. But I'm just going to leave us with this question. What kinds of stories are we choosing to tell? And what kinds of humans are those stories shaping us into?
I'll go first because I want to share an image before it leaves my brain. But we're talking about there has to be something to address, and this is really uncomfortable. But the stakes do get higher and higher, even on an individual level. If there's some growth to be had and you're ignoring your cycles, I say the universe speaks louder and louder to get your attention. So that's what's happening on a mass scale right now. But I just had the image of like, you got to lift the doormat to see the cockroaches. And I think it's going to be a long haul, like Andrea said, things get worse before they get better. And it's going to be tough. And maybe our grandchildren will see some kind of progress. But maybe in the meantime, like I was hinting at, just appreciate the power of storytelling and just look at the way stories are being spun in the media right now and take note that everything is storytelling. And yeah, maybe don't dwell on the problem because you're asking for more of the same by giving it mental energy. Focus on the solution, tell new stories. I'm just repeating the premise of my book. And maybe aspirational storytelling falls in there somewhere. I think it needs to get better as a new genre because sometimes it can seem silly and irresponsible, but telling more stories where you see those role models of what we're capable of and our capacity and potential will help in the march.
Amen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Woo-hoo!
It has to be possible to tell a new story.
Right. That's literally manifestation and creativity. You got to envision it for it to manifest. That's what vision boards are all about, right? We need to have those models. It's everything.
And we need to pass that on through epigenetics, the power of hope and the power of thinking and imagining and change, transformation. And we have to keep hanging on to that, because you do talk about futility a lot.
Well, welcome to my world. It's a daily struggle for me.
Oh, we can't throw our hands up in the air. We have to focus on the light and, and progress and humanity's beautiful spirit. We have to.
Michael Beckwith says a prayer you might want to repeat is, I'm open and available to more good than I could have ever possibly imagined. And I think Marianne Williamson also says, like, how the hell would you know what's best? God has a greater perspective. So when you say, let me do your will, and I'm not getting religious here, but, the collective intelligence that keeps us marching forward. If you just say, look, use me, I'm here to serve. Of course, the greater perspective is going to know how to use you, whereas you might be operating on the pleasure principle. So I just feel like there's something in there where if you're available and your goal is to serve, and also to focus on not what you want to accomplish or what you want to become, but who you want to be. If we all did that homework and started to emanate what we want to be, then Rene, as you were hinting at, through the ripple effect, how could the macro not benefit? And whenever somebody says, oh, that's Pollyanna, be the change you wish to see in the world, I do say, but it's actually the only way. So my book does go into the mechanics of the propagation of belief, how our beliefs are cemented in the first place through those highly emotional experiences and the mapping, etc. But then it talks about, then how are those beliefs propagated? Well, the water cooler, sharing, how was your day, sweetheart, on the pillow at night, fellowship hall at church, right? And then you go wider, the social conditioning that happens in schools and churches and all of our institutions. And then, it becomes policy that becomes law. Again, I quote Gandhi, like, I'm not going to get it exactly right, but you guys know that, like, your thoughts become your beliefs become your habits become your worldview becomes your destiny, something like that.
Yeah.
If we could all just keep these mechanics in mind, you know what I mean? Then we can nip things in the bud or craft them. I use that example, we get our hands in the clay. And yes, Rene, be aware of what we're going to pass on via epigenetics, and then cross our fingers.
That clearly stuck with me in the book.
Yeah.
I guess because I'm expecting a new grandbaby. Anyway.
Oh, really? Wait,
Rosie.
No, that I know. Did Jeanette have twins?
That had twins.
Oh my! See how behind I am, Rene?
Well, they're just babies. They're like a month old.
No, I feel horrible. She hinted at that, and I was like, 3? What is she talking about? And then I just saw a post in Insta of the twins. I had no idea.
Bless her heart. It's your turn next.
To have kids?
Have twins.
I was like, don't hold your breath. That ship has sailed.
To address Virginia's final question.
Well, that was my final question. So, and I think Nick did a really good job wrapping up. I mean, what I really heard in all of that is, I think we need to see where we're responsible and hold ourselves accountable to that responsibility.
Amen. Truly.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like, I always come back to Joseph Campbell's statement, later in his life, where seeing the picture of the earth from space, right? The blue marble. And, he was like, the new myth, the only myth that's going to be worth telling is one that includes everyone, no state, no nation, no division, everyone on this planet having to live together sustainably. And that's the story. That's going to be the new story. And
lots of applause.
It can take thousands of years for a new myth to evolve. Do we have that long with climate change? I don't know.
No, but that's why it's so uncomfortable right now, because globalism, it's been forced upon us. We're rolling with the punches, but I think viewing humanity as an interconnected unit is rather new,
It is a good point, Nick. Yeah, think of it. We didn't even know what was going on across the world when we were little tiny tribes, and we were just, more focused. So this is new. I love that.
The world is a smaller place, and we're feeling those growing pains, even with policy, tariffs, and things like that. Like, how are we going to play with the other kids on the playground?
Wow.
It's a tough moment.
I think that saying it's new, it's a new muscle that we have to flex as a race of humans.
Mhm.
It's new. It's new. This incredible globalization is somewhat new. It's incredible. And
Maybe that's giving ourselves some grace too, you know?
yeah.
There you go. We are in the moment where we all need to learn how to co-create the new narrative as humankind.
Oh,
Woo! You delivered, man. Okay, so thank you guys. And to our listeners, remember, life is story, and we can get our hands in the clay, individually and collectively. We can write a new story. See you next time.
We want to take a moment to thank our wonderful listeners and supporters. Your continued support and sharing of our podcast helps us spread the transformative power of storytelling. If you enjoy our episodes, please rate and review us on your favorite platform and share the podcast with friends and family. For more enriching conversations and insights, subscribe to Language of the Soul podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you listen to podcasts. Follow us on social media and visit our Patreon website for the latest updates and exclusive content. Your support helps us continue to bring these important stories to life. If you'd like to support us further, consider joining our Patreon community for exclusive content and donation options. Every bit of support helps us reach more hearts and minds.